Dear colleagues, I would like to welcome you on the online event. It's good that there are technical facilities in spite of everything, in spite of the war and the air alerts, including COVID-19, which returned back to Ukraine. We have to do our work because our enemies everywhere, on every front line, do not relax. And most probably there won't be a situation when good people will not have enemies. One of the classical authors said, unless you have enemies, then happiness turned away from you. Today's meeting is Ukraine EU throwing light on tobacco lobbyism, war and politics. The purpose of this meeting is to discuss tobacco lobbyists, tobacco manufacturers, and throw light on what they do during the war. While everyone is busy, all the efforts are focused on achieving victory, supporting the armed forces, preparing those who are preparing to get mobilized, to get prepared to the war, and also logistics is involved. We are all involved in a very important activity. However, the tobacco manufacturers, tobacco lobbyists, in spite of all, despite everything, are trying to get better conditions for themselves in order to cover as many clients as possible, even in the country in the state of war, and what they do in the territory of the country. So what they do in the territory of the aggressor country, and of course, they do a quite well-known thing. They help them to finance their army and their aggressive society, which is quite aggressive against Ukraine. It's important for us to find such facts and also to discuss what are the effective means to counteract. We all have observed incredible and also shameful attempt of members of parliament to push through the bill 5616. Most probably the speakers will discuss it in my part when I discuss how the mass media and journalists have to respond to the attempts of tobacco lobbyists to expand their capabilities and their territory and their influence. Members of parliament seemed to have nothing else to do rather than supporting those bad initiatives. Our classic Ivan Franko, the classic Ukrainian author, as he said before, we need to do what we have to do. So we have brought together representatives of public sector, civic sector, maybe people from other sectors will also join us, the ones which are concerned of health, concerned of health of all Ukrainians, and also health of their military servicemen of the armed forces, because objectively they are attacked twice. On one hand, this is the attack from the army of the Russian Federation. On the other hand, such also blows from the State Bureau of Investigation, which took away quite a lot of cigarettes, closed the factory of producing counterfeit cigarettes in Dnipropetrovsk. Instead of destroying those counterfeit products, they invented nothing better rather than transferring to the front line 3 million packs of cigarettes. This is an incredible story. We have to condemn and we have to explain to civil servants that they cannot operate in such a way. If with us, we already have, who can advise me, whether Josh Abrams, regional director of Eurasian programs of children with no tobacco from Washington program, could you please advise me, unless he joined us? It looks like no communications with Washington, and of course we are ready and we are impatiently waiting joining of John Abrams to our video conference. I give the floor to Lilia Olefir, Director of European Anti-Tobacco Partnership. Lilia is connecting from Brussels, and the topic that we shall talk about with Lilia, how strong is tobacco lobbyism in European Union, and how strong is the anti-tobacco movement in response in the EU countries? Another important question, how's the tax policy towards tobacco manufacturers changes during the war of Russia against Ukraine? Lilia, we know that a number of countries, maybe it's also a consolidated decision of the EU, there is a vision that one has to increase the taxes for major energy companies because due to such high prices for gas and other types of energy receive over profits. Whether there is any discussion of this kind about taxation of tobacco sector, because it's hard times, maybe such decisions are necessary. Is it being discussed? You have 10 minutes. Thank you, Natalia. I would like to say a few words about the organization. I represent Smoke-Free Partnership. Is an organization which operates at the level of the EU to fulfill recommendations of the WHO Framework Convention of Fighting Against Tobacco. This is an international convention ratified by the majority of the countries of the world, and also generally by the EU and by EU member countries. A Smoke-Free Partnership is also a coalition representing over 50 independent organizations, European organizations working at the level of analysis, European policy and advocacy, mobilization of efforts of politicians, and also organizations working in the field of public health, so that control over tobacco remains a priority. We know that tobacco is a factor which causes most of the deaths that could have been prevented. Our main counterparts are Belgian Foundation Against Cancer, Cancer Research UK, the Committee National Council of Tobacco, European Heart Network, Health Funds for Smoking Netherlands, and Norwegian Cancer Society. As you may hear, actually quite many of those organizations specialized on fighting against cancer. And we know that tobacco is a risk factor which causes quite a lot of oncological diseases. This year, 2022, at the level of the EU, a lot of progress was achieved because Europe Cancer Beating Plan was approved. In that plan, they have reported that all EU member countries will do their best to concentrate their efforts to reduce and prevent mortality from oncological diseases. In that plan, there are objectives set by the EU as well as the EU member countries. And in particular, there is a special chapter which is about fighting against tobacco. This is about a clear legislative instruments which may be implemented at the level of EU member countries. Among them, a revision of Tobacco Products Directive, and Ukraine, which has approved the law recently, which is about changes of the warning signs on the packages of tobacco products, changes which about limiting advertising, quite many other changes recorded in that law has implemented the directive, which is in force since 2016 in the EU. Yet in the coming few years, it is planned that in order to reduce mortality from oncological diseases, it's necessary to revise that particular directive. In addition, in that plan, it is recorded that it is also necessary to revise the directive, which is about raising taxes for tobacco products. We shall focus on that in detail later, also to revise recommendations about prohibition of smoking in public places. The previous recommendations were approved in the year 2009. And generally, as a clearly set objective, there is a commitment that to reduce widespread of smoking by 2040 down to 5%, and the objective is to achieve tobacco-free generation by those legislative instruments. Speaking about intervention of tobacco industry and presence of tobacco industry, we as the civil society also monitor the data of the registries, which at the level of the EU, there is a registry, a register of everyone involved in lobbying, and the data of that register makes it possible for us to have a look into which of those lobbyists are connected to tobacco companies and to evaluate how much money is spent to support those lobbyists. This is a transparency instrument. Of course, it is applied not only to the representatives, those lobbyists who are connected to tobacco companies. This is a general registry of lobbyists. This is one of the instruments which is worthwhile to be introduced in those countries which didn't do it before, because it makes it possible to monitor, to observe presence of tobacco corporations at the level of the countries in general and also EU member countries. We also had held the index of intervention of tobacco industry. Quite many countries are getting involved, and they do monitoring on a permanent basis, and they allow understanding to understand which pressure is made by tobacco corporations on representatives of the government. Of course, the situation in the EU, because anti-tobacco movement and general the movement, which is about taking care of public health, and the civil society is rather strong because they operate for a long time. Yet it's necessary to say that strengthening of the anti-tobacco legislation is the best indicator of how well the government agencies uh, counteract the intervention of tobacco corporations. One of the matters was raising taxes for tobacco products. I remembered the directive which is being revised right now. Another important element of how the policy is revised in the EU, that there is a clearly recorded cycle of change of the legislation. When it is about the directives, it's clearly recorded what must happen. First, the research and analysis must take place of how the existing, of whether the existing directive is effective, how does it influence the reduction of smoking. Concerning the directive about taxes, all the necessary research was done, and all the government agencies involved decided that there is the right time to revise the directive, and the proposal of what can be the new directive must be published in December of this year. Therefore, we expect for the results of this directive, for the proposals of this will be followed by the discussion of by the government agencies involved, and the important role for revision of that directive will be played by the governments of all EU member countries, because this directive must be approved and voted unanimously. This is a procedure which involves unanimity, and therefore it's important to cooperate between all the members of our coalition. As I can see, Dmytro Kupyra is present, as well as the civic organization of smoke-free which is part of the smoke-free partnership. It's valuable that Ukraine, since 2018, has been introducing the plan to achieve the minimal level which is in place in the EU, 90 euro per 1,000 pieces. That minimum will be raised. More instruments will be proposed to make everything possible to achieve those objectives which were clearly recorded in Europe's cancer beating plan. It's an important political commitment, though the tobacco industry at the level of the EU, as well as in quite many other countries, of course, they will attempt to counteract, to de-accelerate, to weaken. The role of the civil society is important here. Openness and transparency of government agencies to cooperate with the civil society. One of the important achievements which is recorded at the level of the EU, that two important directorates, DG Sante, DG Health, which is responsible for the policy of public health and which is involved in tobacco, they have clearly recorded that they never meet tobacco industry. Any attempts, if any meetings are absolutely necessary, as it is provided for by the guiding principles, such meetings can take place. However, all the information about such meetings must be public, must be made public. A similar policy was approved in the DG tax, which is responsible for revision of taxation for tobacco products. That's it. Yet we shall have a discussion. I have a question. Different levels of smoking or widespread of the epidemic of the tobacco smoking in the EU countries. There is an interesting statistics on Finland. There was a very successful anti-tobacco policy. Most probably, the widespread of vaping among the school children is only 1%. And other countries show much higher results, unfortunately. I also read that Finland is very actively raising taxes, and they are happy that raising excise for cigarettes reduces reduction of tobacco, and this also correlates not just in Finland, also in every country of the world. It's interesting. Most probably in Finland, tobacco lobby is trying to operate. What could be known? How the Prime Minister Sanna Marin, what is her attitude towards activity of tobacco lobbies, and generally the government of Finland? While having a look at it with a general view, the young Prime Minister, not so experienced, possibly in the political intrigue, maybe it would be easier to cheat her and to convince, shall we do it? We shall have more revenues for the state budget. And yet the government of Finland does not respond to that. Maybe you know anything, maybe some life hacks of the Finnish government in countering tobacco lobbyism. Finland is an interesting case. Also, it's important to look at the sustainability of the processes. 100 years ago in Finland, they had the highest consumption of cigarettes per capita worldwide. And nowadays, it looks like they have the smallest. Finland was one of the first countries which have approved for themselves that they would like to achieve tobacco gain. They were among the first with New Zealand. Now it's a more common trend. As I have mentioned, in the level of the EU, it is recorded. Finland, however, was one of the first. And this was maybe 7 years or more ago. At that time, it was something extraordinary, out of the box. Few people thought with such concept, and yet they have clearly declared they have such an objective. We spoke in one of the conferences with representatives of the government of Finland. There is such a level of understanding that one can reduce expenses for health, namely by strengthening anti-tobacco legislation. This is not just about individual politicians who can keep the defense even against tobacco industry. Generally, sustainability and stability of those policies that were recorded against some traditions, because the plan that they have approved is clearly followed by them. This is a higher level. When there are clearly set up processes, nobody can think it can be different. Speaking of smaller countries, in general of the Nordic countries, most of them have very good laws. If you look into the prevalence of tobacco smoking, of course, there are some exceptions about some new products, yet the tradition of the Nordic countries that they were among the first to change the legislation of control of tobacco, and now they have one of the best indicators about prevalence of tobacco smoking, which is rather low. That's important. This is an example of the steady policy. As our previous president was saying, yes, of course, when the policy is steady, it can be successful. Mr. George Abrams has joined us from the Children with No Tobacco campaign, and he will talk to us, and his presentation is on the topic life of Ukrainians, of every Ukrainian matters. So, Mr. George, you have 10 minutes for your speech.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. Thanks for having me. I'm not going to take 10 minutes. I just wanted to speak for a few minutes. For those who don't know me or my organization, the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids has been working for 25 years to reduce the burden of tobacco use on populations in the United States and around the world. In the United States, we are an advocacy organization. We work to promote policies that will reduce tobacco consumption, especially among younger people. And globally, we partner with organizations such as those in attendance today, and we partner with them to help them promote the same kinds of policies. We have been partnering with organizations in Ukraine for the better part of 15 years now. Our partnership remains firm and strong throughout the current crisis, just as it was during previous crises, starting as far back as the very first Orange Revolution. I have a very simple message. I think it's understood that the global community stands with Ukraine, stands with the Ukrainian people. If I could do more to help, I certainly would. And I know that millions and millions of people all over the world feel the same way. But I want to explain why tobacco control matters even now in this time of national crisis for the Ukrainian people. But I think the answer is quite obvious. In Ukraine, people matter. The Ukrainian people matter to the Ukrainian people. This is why Ukraine is fighting for its freedom, for its independence, fighting so vigorously, fighting so beautifully, despite all of the losses that you experience. You matter to each other. The life of every Ukrainian matters, as does everywhere. The lives of people everywhere matter, but we see that Ukrainians are willing to stand up, fight, and unfortunately, in some cases, die for each other. For me, tobacco control is the same thing. It doesn't matter if it's an invading army or if it's a company selling a poisonous product that is doing the killing. I think this time of war really shows how precious life is. And to me, every policy that helps to save Ukrainian lives, that helps your people to enjoy long, healthy lives, it's an important policy. And it's those sort of policies that we should be celebrating. It's those sort of policies that we should be pursuing. You know, tobacco control is not a fringe idea for Ukraine. To me, tobacco control is as much a fight for freedom as the larger fight that you're all fighting now. You know, it's a freedom from an addiction that makes people sicker and weaker than they could be, than they should be. It's a freedom from cancers and heart attacks and strokes and a very specific set of diseases that debilitate us and that kill us only because we use this specific product. So it's very different from something like COVID or swine flu. It's not an airborne disease. It's a disease that comes in a package that you purchase at a store. And these sort of policies will free more people from the addictions that cause them to do this. These policies also allow freedom from those companies that still pay taxes to the Russian invader, and that are selling these products on the territory of Ukraine. So to me, any public health and safety measure that saves lives should be celebrated, and should particularly be celebrated in Ukraine, because these are policies that are a victory over death, just as Ukraine's victory in this war will be. And this is the story of tobacco control. This is a victory of life over death. This is a fight for health over sickness, and it's a fight against a disease that is spread by a specific set of people that are doing very deliberate things in our countries, and that are causing these illnesses. Passing these policies prevents that from happening. Implementing these policies, which to me is amazing that the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian people are doing an amazing job of implementing new tobacco control legislation in Ukraine. Again, even in this time of war. And the long-term political commitment to comply with these sort of policies will be key to building a healthier future and saving as many of these precious lives as possible. That's really all I have to say. But I want to...
Дякую, пане Джоше. Є ще у мене кілька запитань, але я дивлюся, що ми трохи відстаємо.
Thank you. I have several more questions, yet we are a little bit behind the schedule. If possible, you please stay maybe during the discussion. I will at least ask that question: how the tobacco companies and tobacco lobbyists have made use of the situation of the pandemic of the COVID-19 when the level of anxiety has increased worldwide. If we have time for that, thank you for your speech and for your support and for your solidarity with Ukrainian people. We appreciate all that. Now I give the floor to Dmytro Kupyra, Executive Director of the Center for Civic Representation Life, and Dmytro will speak how tobacco lobbyism works during the war in Ukraine as a European country. So this is a suggestion. Maybe this is not fully European way, and in European Ukraine we would welcome some civilized way, and maybe lobbyism of some good, healthy, civilized ideas rather than tobacco lobbyism. So Dmytro, you have the floor. Glory to Ukraine, glory to heroes. Thank you very much indeed for this opportunity. You know that Ukraine, along with the Western world of freedom, is in the period of challenge. Our society sustains the aggression. At the same time, there are companies that disseminate products which are recognized as those causing addiction. 50% of consumers of those products sustain early deaths due to the diseases caused by those products, namely tobacco products, using probably the weakening of the state, because all of the attention, all of the efforts are focused on preservation of territorial integrity, rescuing people from murders. All the attention are focused there. The tobacco companies use these opportunities to have additional privilege in Ukraine and receive additional opportunities to promote their products. At the same time, I would like to say that in spite of those attempts, I will make a disclaimer that the Parliament of Ukraine nevertheless acts in the interest of the society, and the red lines can never be crossed. And I will discuss that in more detail. We can speak of several interesting cases. One of the cases is that tobacco companies, in particular the Association Ukrainian Tobacco, has applied to the parliament, to members of parliament, members of the Committee for Customs and Taxation Policy, with an initiative. Shall we postpone implementation of the norms provided for in the comprehensive anti-tobacco law, which was signed by the president last year, as it was approved by the parliament at the same time. And this year, in January, it was signed by the president Volodymyr Zelensky, anti-tobacco law 7088. And the proposal was, shall we postpone the norms of implementation, new medical warnings, which are planned starting from 2024, or prohibition of advertising of electronic cigarettes and devices for heating of tobacco, which were not regulated,
що в нас відновилось зростання поширеності вживання,
which caused renewal of the growth of prevalence of tobacco smoking. As I proposed, why don't we postpone it by several months after the end of the wartime? Such a proposal was recorded, that they have arrived with that proposal. We have a letter from them with no justification, because it's hard for business. Indeed, the business has to look for new consumers, and quite many consumers have left the country. New ones are necessary to replace those people who have quitted smoking. Nowadays, luckily, there is no feedback from members of parliament. It was rejected. Yet we have recorded that using the war, the only argument was that there is a war, and why don't we introduce such a norm about postponement? Another norm, which was recently aggressively attempted, is a renewal of smoking in the public premises, like restaurants, hotels, railway terminals, bus terminals. Those are the key premises where members of parliament acted in the interests probably of the tobacco industry. To our surprise, they did not even hide that. They say, well, we were approached by representatives of the restaurant business who sell tobacco products, and we would like to support their interest that they can also sell tobacco products and to allow people to smoke tobacco products inside the premises. Even filing of that amendment was a direct violation of the rules of the parliament. We, as the public, together with champions of tobacco control in the parliament, have focused the attention to that. We were joined by medical community, and the media has highlighted that actually that norm was rejected by the society, because Ukrainian society has approved an important norm that we don't smoke inside public premises, and also we expand smoking-free public places outdoors. That norm enjoys absolute support. In more than 92% of the citizens say we don't smoke inside premises. We don't smoke indoors. We would like to breathe air free of tobacco. Such amendments supported by MPs Alexander Sanchenko, who is also at the same time head of the youth wing of the Servant of People, which is a party at power, whose family runs a network of restaurants which allows smoking tobacco in their premises illegally. And this was their initiative. When it came to voting, I can tell you that those amendments were voted by 88 out of necessary 226 votes. Speaking of the entire parliament, in the parliament we have 424, if I remember correctly, members of parliament. What does it mean? It means that the parliament of Ukraine just another time has demonstrated that the matter of protection of the population against tobacco is ensured. The government policy is to protect people from tobacco, smoke, and nicotine indoors, as well as in most public places outdoors. Such a common position of MPs to reject such amendments demonstrates that the Parliament of Ukraine acts in the interest of public health. And also, this Parliament of 9th Convocation has approved comprehensive 1978 anti-tobacco law. Also, it has introduced harmonization of excise for cigarettes for heating up to the level of tobacco products like cigarettes, like conventional cigarettes. We had a long story how the tobacco industry was doing that. It was the case before the war. It's an interesting case. I need 1 minute for it. If possible, I can share my screen for that, if I'm allowed to do so. So the point is that tobacco industry proposed after an increase when it was not enacted to reduce by 30% the excise for cigarettes for heating compared to conventional cigarettes. We as a public, based on the data of the World Health Organization and other institutions, we're saying there is no need for that because any tobacco product is hazardous and kills, especially if that tobacco product was not regulated. It was even sold to children. Such a proposal was supported, even it was initiated by head of the majority parliamentary group, Mr. Arhamia. Luckily, we could convince the MPs to reject that amendment, and the result was obvious. Ukraine received in 2021 6 times more revenues from excise for heating cigarettes compared to the period before the increase of such an excise. In absolute terms, from 1.7 billion up to 10.2 billion hryvnia was the increase. I would like to add the insider information. We had a discussion with Mr. Arhamia after that amendment was rejected, and he has admitted, and he thanked the public that we stood strong and we have prevented this amendment from being approved, because he also said that this amendment was initiated seemingly for support of activity of the legal business. And as it was proven, the arguments that were shown were not true, they were false, and they misled members of parliament, the people who indeed influence the public policy. Therefore, we insist that in control over tobacco, we must observe the Article 5.3 of the Framework Convention of WHO of fighting against tobacco. The state policy in the field of control over tobacco must be protected against the influence of tobacco industry. The voice of tobacco industry cannot be heard when we discuss how to protect public health from hazard of tobacco and nicotine. Of course, there is intervention. We can see it, we can record that, and with our detection, we can repel it, and we can protect that those achievements in controlling over tobacco that we have achieved and that we will achieve in the future, for Ukrainians to be healthy, for Ukrainians to live longer. And now, as never before, we need to improve the demographical situation, because Ukraine has sustained and keeps sustaining heavy losses due to emigration, as well as due to losses of lives due to aggression. Therefore, health of Ukrainians is definitely a priority after defense, which comes immediately after defense of the state of Ukraine. After beginning of the wide-scale war, what do you think? The tobacco lobbyists, did they become more active, or did they become less active, or did it remain the same as before the wide-scale war? If we arithmetically calculate the number of their initiatives in the year 2021, 2020, and 2022, I can tell you that after the invasion in the first days, they all have run away just in a second. However, when it became clear that the armed forces of Ukraine and Ukrainian defenders will keep the country strong, and the government, the political authorities, and citizens can still operate in Ukraine, they became active once again. And we can say that nowadays they're quite aggressive because indeed the budget requires support, being the tax agents of the excise for tobacco products. Once again, that excise is paid by taxpayers, by the consumers of tobacco products. They also suffer and they also pay for it. While being tax agents of such products, the tobacco companies aggressively promote their interests, blackmailing the government, saying, give us a preference, give us better conditions because we pay the excise for tobacco products. I would like to draw your attention. They are only the tax agents for the excise. Everything is actually paid by the consumers. Therefore, protection of consumers, as it looks to me, must be a priority before any commercial interests of tobacco companies. Thank you, Dmytro. Moving to the topic of taxation, Elvina Koroj, the lawyer of the Center of Democracy and Rule of Law, and we shall speak with Elvina how the tax policy for tobacco companies nowadays during the war, is it making it more tight, or is it about protection of lives of people? My name is Elvina Koroj. I am the lawyer of the Center of Democracy and Rule of Law. And today I would like to draw your attention to the problem of taxation of tobacco companies during the war. One of the main taxes of tobacco companies, both for the company and the state budget of Ukraine, is the excise tax. Why is that so important? And why do we need to increase it? And why tobacco companies should continue paying it? In order to understand this situation, I would like to have a look into the numbers of the state budget of Ukraine. The revenues into the state budget of Ukraine and the amount of excise for 2021. We have the numbers that just in the past year, 2021, the revenues from excise 63.5 billion hryvnia. This is 16% more than a payment of the excise in the year 2020. This happens because we have implemented a 7-year plan, which includes a gradual increase of the amount of excise by 12% each year. Ukraine, under conditions of the full-scale war, is important to quote an example of units of military equipment in order to understand how large is this amount of money for our country today. For 63.5 billion hryvnia, Ukraine can buy 372 tanks or 136 warplanes, Sukhoi 25. Therefore, such revenues, such amounts of revenues into the state budget are quite important for our further victory and continuation of our fight. One of the problems is the field of increase of the amount of excise, which is quoted by tobacco companies. If they say, if to increase the excise, it will be the burden for consumers, and they will have to sustain that burden. Actually, by the legislation, the direct duty to pay the excise stays with their manufacturer. Therefore, even with the minimal increase of the excise, the tobacco giant will be the first one who will be responsible for paying the excise. Therefore, the statement that the consumer will suffer first and suffer most from such an increase of excise is not really true. Another problem about an increase of the excise, which is also quoted by tobacco giants, is that seemingly is not the right time to increase the excise. There is wartime, the prices are high anyway. How can we increase the price of cigarettes? I would like to remind you that regretfully most of tobacco giants did not leave the market of the Russian Federation. They continue sponsoring the war of Russia in Ukraine, and they continue to pay taxes to the aggressor country. With their money and their taxes, Ukraine still has a capability to mobilize their military resources and also attack us with missiles. Reduction or keeping the tax the same for our country cannot be discussed, because we need to increase it even more, because those tobacco giants work for both markets, one of which is the market of the aggressor country, and their money and an increase of tax payment of taxes makes our victory closer and help us to support our army and our defense system, and also in the future to build our economy and the financial system after the war. Therefore, this is a very important thing, such as an increase of tobacco tax for the sake of victory of our country in the war. Of course, during the war, we face a lot of challenges. One of such challenges is the field of taxation of tobacco companies during the war, is existing smuggling of cigarettes with no excise stamp, those which are not subject to excise tax. Regretfully, we have quite many situations when even the military receive cigarettes with no excise stamp, or those who were brought from duty-free shops. Of course, those cigarettes are sold illegally, and the failure to pay the tax from them implies that we will be first to feel lack of funds in the budget, because again, this is a budget and this is formed over the year. In the long run, that's about the advantages of an increase of the excise tax. We can say that an increase of that tax will also provoke a reduction of smokers among the population. How? Kiev School of Economics has calculated that if to follow 7-year plan, which matches Euro integrational commitments undertaken by Ukraine, and which includes a gradual increase of the tax, before the year 2025, we can save 480,000 lives of our compatriots. This is a very large number. And indeed, this is additional burden of the healthcare system. Due to saved lives, we shall be able to build and improve the healthcare system. And again, we shall have better demographics. And also the population will be more healthy and non-smoking. What is the conclusion? Of course, the problem of taxation of tobacco companies during the war does exist, yet there are the ways to solve that problem. The Center of Democracy and Rule of Law proposes to revise and increase the level of excise tax, because nowadays, as we know, there is a sharp increase of the exchange rate of euro and dollar. We can enter the store and see that consumer goods, which are vital for people, are sold at higher price, because it depends on the exchange rate. We can go to the drugstore and we shall see that in order to stay healthy or treat any disease, we need to spend more money for medical drugs, which became more expensive. Yet we cannot say the same of cigarettes, because first, there was no higher excise, and manufacturers would not like to increase the price per one package. Therefore, we are facing the choice when people have to spend much more money in order to continue living and remaining healthy, rather than they can come and just spend a little money and at the same time kill themselves slowly or quickly, or contract other diseases like lung cancer, pulmonary cancer, heart failure, or TB. The tax for tobacco companies is not the tight policy. This is a process of saving lives of our citizens. And this is filling the budget of Ukraine and reduction of demand for smoking among the public. The higher is the excise, even due to the pricing policy, the less is the desire to buy that pack of cigarettes and to poison oneself. Thank you. Thank you. That argument about the workplaces this year, in the year 2022, will not work, or it becomes less important because some factories, some tobacco factories did not work in Ukraine. Some of them still do not work. Therefore, it's not really about the jobs. It's really about imports of cigarettes by tobacco companies from other countries while continuing to poison Ukrainians. And of course, this is unacceptable. And of course, with increase of taxes, one can reduce demand and reduce pressure on tobacco on health of Ukrainians. But now it's my turn. I will speak less than 10 minutes because we are a little bit behind. It's important to have some time for the discussion. And the topic of my speech, how the journalists should make public pressure on tobacco lobbyists. There is an interesting story which illustrates generally an increase of the role of the pressure of civil society in the process of repelling the draft law 5616. Quite intensively, the journalists from various groups have taken that topic. It's not a secret that there is a group of journalists who are for a long time in the anti-tobacco area. And there is another group of journalists which are paid by tobacco companies. In a good sense, we have one, our group has one, and we have actively participated, and also very powerful journalists participated, who don't even live in Kiev, whom we don't even communicate too often, like Ostap Drozdov on his YouTube channel made a very good program about the attempt of promoting the draft law 5616. If you can share the screen, I would like to show one slide of my publication, if you can see it now. This headline about the draft law 5616, servant of the people, Fries and Sanchenko, those are the authors, is the same as Yanukovych, former president, and his sons. I will not retell that blog. This is comparison of the methods that were attempted to be used by Fries and Sanchenko, MPs of the pro-government party, servants of the people, with what Yanukovych did before, and as well as his sons. That publication has touched deeply the MPs. I have received private messages from other MPs whom I know personally, and they were annoyed how this could happen. Sanchenko, who was on Maidan revolution, and I made them equal to Yanukovych, and they were annoyed, yet I put them to the right place. With my replies, I said, well, you could be on Maidan Revolution, and yet you cancel all your achievements because you become exactly the same Yanukovych, who was expelled from the country. My conclusion is it becomes very effective when the tobacco problem is moved away from the theme of public health, taxation, such narrow specialized topics, and when we take it to general political level, when the problem of tobacco lobbyists and their behavior is highlighted through the notion of integrity or lack of integrity of politicians, when you take it to the national level, not even being based on any statistics of how the cigarettes are hazardous for health, because as it was shown with that story, lobbying of the draft law 5616, our politicians, MPs are getting touched. They become ashamed and they get annoyed, and this has a good impact. I believe that Ostap Drozdov, Yevgen Klinsky,
тютюнового лобізму політичним, загальнонаціональним,
made that matter public as well as national wide, and this helped us to achieve such a result. Just IT MPs of Servant of the People group have supported that amendment, 2 amendments. So this draft law in the table was the one that should be supported by the entire pro-government party. Therefore, my conclusion is that we should continue using that approach, taking it to more broad and general things, because it concerns everyone. It's a matter of integrity towards the work of tobacco lobbyists must be number one. If they are not honest, we need to focus on it. And I believe this can generate success for us, because predicting that tobacco lobbyists all of a sudden will stop their activity is not possible. Shall we move to the discussion, expressing proposals about how to prevent an increase of intervention of tobacco industry into the government policy? The journalists will do their job further on. They will demonstrate dishonest attempts to influence government policy. Yet it is important to hear the opinion of all participants of today's discussion. What, as you believe, should be a priority? What instruments should be used? Mr. Gleb Kolesov. Good afternoon. I'm happy to see everyone, all the colleagues and friends, the partners of fighting against tobacco. I'm in the place where people smoke a lot due to some wrong understanding that it reduces stress. And yet I try to stay in the anti-tobacco family. I'm happy with the speeches. I support all the statements made today. The only thing I would like to add, as I would like to complement the main statement of Joshua, that every Ukrainian life matters. We must say that we are in such a period, and our country is in such a historical period, that every life, every piece of health of every Ukrainian, of every foreigner also who stays in the country, not counting our northeastern neighbors, is important, because our country requires a lot of capacity, including human resources, for that fighting. And I believe it's important to keep those resources healthy, especially by fighting against tobacco. We know that tobacco kills slowly. It's not that fast as a bullet or missile. It kills slowly during the life. And those people who smoke during their lives contract diseases, including chronic diseases, which cause hard consequences, including lethal. The government policy that we are supporting, even the initiatives during the war. I know there is active work in the working group to develop the regulatory framework for our law 1978, approved at the end of the last year. Also, there is continued work countering lobbyist amendments that emerge in various draft laws, even not in that field, not in the healthcare field, not in the taxation field, not in the field of tobacco control. And yet there are some unpleasant amendments, and members of parliament during the war are doing that to one's regret. We need to respond, especially the public must respond, because the public is a front line of fighting against tobacco lobbyists. This is a zero line. This is a front line. The public response, then we involve political champions, MPs who are proponents of anti-tobacco, policy, also proponents from the executive branch of the government. We must stay agile, because some MPs who work openly in the interest of tobacco business continue their dirty business. One hand washes another hand. We know that as a representative of the same public, now I am in the military uniform, that we can do it. Our last example, I took an active part. I could take an active part in countering the amendments 5616 of the 5616. We have proven that the public can break that by insider information. Personally, the MPs I have good contacts with wrote into the personal messages that everything is pre-approved, the party is interested, everything is decided. You as a public can hardly confront it. No, with the pool of independent journalists, public experts, civic experts, lawyers could break those amendments. And I believe that we need to keep that fighting spirit. Therefore, this is not the end of the game, because we are quite far from it, and yet we shall make it closer. Our objective 2022 with no tobacco has occurred. The law was approved. As Mr. Radusky said on one of the committees, that in Ukraine there will be a generation that will not know what tobacco is. I believe that we can aspire for that and finally win. I have a question to you. How the cigarettes are getting to the front line? Could you please? And what is your attitude to that story that the State Bureau of Investigation transferred 3 million packs of cigarettes confiscated on the counterfeit factory? What is your vision? How this should be highlighted? How to speak to government agencies that this is unacceptable? When people go to the war, they can return with bad experience, emotional, physical, psychological, and also they can return smokers if they were non-smokers. I can still hear you. There are lots of dogs here. We can stand that. How the cigarettes get to the front line? I will say a very open thing. Cigarettes also get through some volunteers as well, because some MPs are making PR on it. For example, as it was mentioned today, some MPs supply cigarettes. Excise-free, duty-free cigarettes, I can see them every day. Answering the question, it's difficult to convince people who are in a stress situation that it is bad to smoking, because they don't understand. At some basic level, they need to be proven that, they need to be convinced based on the facts, and yet there is no time for that. Personally, for me, it's difficult to cope with me that people smoke here, and they smoke a lot. And yet, this is true. There must be certain social work, in particular the work of our health agencies, to do that awareness campaign all the time. As far as cigarettes are concerned, through my hands, as a person who is interested, as I work in the field of tobacco control, I saw cigarettes from all corners of the world, mostly smuggled, contraband, counterfeit, and smuggling. I saw Winstons and cans from the so-called Lugansk People's Republic. Actually, they were manufactured in Russia, and by some schemes, they were supplied here to Ukraine. Cigarettes with no medical warning, most probably smuggling as well. I must say that I have a subjective opinion that tobacco companies are interested that those cigarettes are in the turnover and supplied to the front line, even free of charge, within the so-called humanitarian aid or volunteers support. Tobacco companies involve smokers by doing that. There are lots of big surveys. One of the surveys says that there is a substantial growth of smoking during the war because cigarettes are supplied free of charge, and tobacco companies receive clients for many, many years ahead, because the war will finish sooner or later, and people will continue smoking because they will have nicotine addiction. The cigarettes arrive from Japan. Japanese Marlboro is often found. Nobody smokes it because it's bad quality-wise. Yet the fact of supplies of cigarettes, as I believe, is not good. And this is not a good example of volunteers' activity. I would like to apply to the volunteers, telling them that there are more important things than cigarettes, believe me. The most basic example is blood stopping, the thermal vision devices, which are quite expensive. If you would like to satisfy the whim of the smoker, please save that money and keep more money to buy a thermal vision device, night vision device. What State Bureau of Investigation must be told? Maybe the customs office or police, who can also confiscate cigarettes and transfer it to the front line, while thinking it's a good thing to do. Of course, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. This is lack of communications between the government agencies, most probably. I believe that communications of the healthcare ministry is important. Of course, they don't have no authority to control. However, they should not keep silent. At least they should speak up. There is some primary need for cigarettes, as people say, and yes, yet there are quite many other important things which are also necessary, and maybe it's better to communicate with the State Bureau on Investigation or Customs Office, let them confiscate some corruption things like vehicles. The customs confiscates vehicles, equipment, domestic appliances. Let them transfer it to the front line, not such artificial things like cigarettes, which just turn into smoke in the air. There are more useful things which can be confiscated by the law enforcement, State Bureau Investigation, customs, which can be transferred to the front line. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for defending us. Thank you very much indeed. Glory to Ukraine. And now I would like to request Lilia to join the discussion. I would like to remind that in May, Ukraine received the award for achievements in the field of control over tobacco. It's important to record where we are and the incredible progress we have achieved, although for tobacco corporations, like for aggressor country, they perceive Ukraine as something which belongs to them, and they would like to kill just to satisfy their own ambitions that have nothing in common with well-being and development. Ukraine, for all people in the West, European Union, each of us, each of those people who now fight and do it to defend those values which are often quoted in the West, European values, democracy, liberty. They do their best, and with their own example, and how one should take care of each other, and even under the conditions of the war, which looks to people in the West like something impossible in the 21st century, in the year 2022, and we have returned back that indeed this is possible. And the same fight, as Gleb said before, and the colleague said before, takes place on the other front line. It took place earlier, and Ukraine makes huge progress in the field of control of the tobacco epidemic. And all those cases that were discussed by Dmytro and Elvina and Gleb are just examples that we speak openly. We're not afraid to quote the names of the MPs who defend the interests of their tobacco corporation. We are not afraid to call things as they are. This is a huge progress we achieved as a society for quite a short period of independence and democracy. Therefore, I would like ourselves not to forget about all those huge efforts that we make and the huge progress we achieved, even in comparison to many countries that are a bit wealthier compared to us, a bit more developed, but not because we are bad. That inferiority complex is something we got rid of, and it's important to support that with more victories and achievements. Joshua Abrams, you have the floor. I would like to formulate or repeat my question. What are the ways of countering tobacco lobbyists who have made use of a COVID pandemic and also the war, made use of the war of Russia against Ukraine? Both phenomena have raised the level of anxiety, and that stereotype that we can see in the movies and in the books and in the marketing, you can smoke and calm down. And there are advertising campaigns developed by tobacco companies that recommend to take a bath and read the book and smoke. How to counter that? How in that situation is that complex situation is used by tobacco companies?
Thank you for your questions. There are quite a few questions in your questions, so I'll try to excuse me, break them down and respond to each one. So regarding the tobacco industry's actions during the pandemic, during the war, what we've seen across all countries, particularly during the pandemic, obviously, which affected all countries, is the tobacco industry seeking to act as a responsible corporate citizen. So corporate social responsibility is the terminology that we use, where corporations will engage in philanthropy. They will donate money. They will donate products. During the time of the pandemic, they were trying to donate personal protective gear or ventilators, or provide funding to hospitals. In a crisis as severe as the pandemic, it is, of course, very difficult to prevent a corporate entity from donating something that's really needed. But what was important and what I think advocates all around the world were able to do, and Ukrainian advocates were also able to do, were to remind policymakers that the entity that is seeking to provide a certain amount of assistance is contributing to the problem by selling a product that actually weakens the immune system and makes COVID much more dangerous for people that smoke, for example, put them in much greater danger. The underlying conditions, if people remember that terminology. And also, they're not doing nearly as much as they could be. One tobacco company, Philip Morris International, has an annual operating budget and an annual revenue larger than most countries' GDP. And so, for a company that rich to donate so little is obvious whitewashing. And for a company that is so clearly contributing to underlying health problems that led to the deaths of many more people than otherwise would have happened, is just sheer hypocrisy. If the tobacco industry truly wanted to have an impact on COVID, they would have stopped manufacturing and selling their products. All of these companies are rich enough that they could move into other, they could invest in something else. They could invest in green farming. They could invest in windmills for Ukrainian steppes to allow Ukraine to become 100% clean energy efficient. But they don't. And even during the middle of the pandemic, they continued to market and to sell. And Ukraine had a perfect example where advocates, including young advocates, were able to highlight that tobacco products were being sold sold through online delivery, online personal delivery apps. So Glovo was selling IQOS products. Highlighted that fact, made a lot of noise in the media, brought it to the attention of policymakers, and Glovo canceled those sales because they understood that it's both bad PR and bad business to be seen as delivering a product to consumers that is actually contributing to poor lung health. So that's one example from the COVID pandemic. An example during this time of war in Ukraine, I think my colleagues actually provided very strong cases of what's happening. To me, the bottom line is for my statement. We're not really seeing any evidence that any of the major tobacco companies have truly left Russia. And yet the same tobacco companies are saying that they support Ukraine. It's either one or the other. You're either profiting off of war, which is what these companies are doing, or you are demonstrating with visible steps that you are shutting your operations in a country, leaving that country, will no longer do any business in that country because that is an aggressor state that is causing major instability internationally and invaded a sovereign country and is threatening its people. So it's a very simple scenario. What's great about working in this field of public health is that there's really nothing good that you can say about the tobacco industry. The product that they sell is a poison. It kills people. It's been documented. It's been proven. There's no argument. So why are they still here? The best thing that we can do to prevent the kind of marketing that you mentioned, this kind of image shaping that, that you can have a cigarette and relax, which is true. It's a narcotic. It's a drug. It does give you a high. There's nicotine. It's a drug that causes a physiological reaction. So that is true. But the best way to prevent the kind of marketing, the kind of public narrative that this is somehow good, is to pass the policies within the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, the kinds of policies that Ukraine has been successfully passing, that limits the ability of the tobacco companies to market this product. Nobody's arguing that tobacco should be illegal. In the United States, we're moving away from strict drug laws because we've seen that the social impact of keeping something like marijuana legal is far worse than the actual impact of a legalized product. Strict regulation, strict regulation according to FCTC is the best way to keep a product that will most likely remain legal for the foreseeable future out of people's minds, out of people's homes, and out of stores. If people still want to smoke, that's great, but you don't need to advertise it. You don't need to build a movement behind it. You don't need to get kids hooked to it. You don't need to artificially depress prices to make it cheaper than a loaf of bread, than a bottle of water. So the solutions are right there. They're within the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. They're within Ukrainian legislation. They need to be implemented, and that will go very, very far in keeping the tobacco industry away from our minds as well as our wallets.
Дякую вам за ці рекомендації, пане Джоше. І якщо
Thank you for these recommendations. We are lagging behind. However, if there are any people willing to join the discussion and recommendations, you have a chance to do so.
Якщо можна, буквально ще одна теза про
Just another statement that indeed the tobacco industry, while having a lot of experience in promoting its interest, is trying to play with politicians and society, giving pieces, taking away loaves. In Ukraine, we had the example when a particular tobacco company is telling that they made some donations, which is also for 10 million hryvnia, which is probably a violation of the law, and they don't pay billions of hryvnia. Let them keep those bits for themselves and pay in line with the taxes in line with the legislation. Don't demand preferences for themselves, and do not counter the efforts of the government and the society as they approve policies to defend public interests. The interest is obvious. This is obtaining as much profit as possible. They are fully cold-blooded about our society. The war of Russia against Ukraine demonstrates they are ready to make money here, make money there, telling that they are great taxpayers and telling also us that they're great taxpayers, and it's important for them to take the profits. They are cynical about our society, and they sell products which kill our people. And we also know, we must know that our objective is to defend lives of Ukrainians, as we understand what huge damage, dozens of thousands of deaths in Ukraine, 85 to 130 by different sources, both numbers are right, thousands, those are huge numbers. We need to defend our people, and we need to protect the national interest. Our national interest is health of our people. Gleb, would you like to add? I just support what Dmytro said before. So, colleagues, in the chat, I don't see any messages that people are willing to speak. Therefore, most probably we shall call it a day. I hope the organizers held the recording. They have taken the note of all the proposals and all the ideas that were expressed during our online event. Summarizing it briefly, one should focus the work on further implementation of the Framework Convention of countering tobacco, and also we shall follow the new directive in the European Union as future members of European Union. Olaf Scholz has mentioned that Ukraine has to be accepted to European Union. We are in favor. We vote with two hands for it. We need to promote communications of the Ministry for Health with other government agencies, State Bureau of Investigation, the Customs Office, the border guards, and volunteers. I believe that if the Minister for Health would say something to the volunteers on that topic, it would have good results. And also the civic activists who operate in the anti-tobacco field should strengthen their work with the volunteers. We have quotations from Gleb, and we can have it on our flag and disseminate. I believe that the volunteers and someone from State Bureau of Investigation could not even think of it from such a perspective, and just act spontaneously based on their stereotypes, or based on some understandings as they saw in the old movies that all people in the war smoke cigarettes. Yet we have the capacity, and we have intelligence, and we have the respect and trust as civic organizations in the Ukrainian society have a high level of trust. Therefore, we need to work more on it, and we need to repel all the attempts of tobacco lobbyists to promote anything in the parliament. Yet there are registered draft laws that were not repelled, that were not actively promoted by MPs. Probably they wait for some suitable time, and we need to continue communications about disallowing those companies who would like to work in Ukrainian market to not to tolerate further work in the market of Russia as they finance the military machine and the militarized society through their budget. I would like to thank the organizers and all the participants, and especially Gleb. Thank you very much indeed that you have joined us and for what you're doing. So shall we start working? I wish everyone a good evening. Thank you.
Дякую вам, всього доброго.
Thank you. Goodbye.